Okay, here we'll perform several multiplications to evaluate expressions. We have been multiplying integers. Now we will have them more than one integer at the same time. So let's start with a few examples. So our example will be to evaluate each expression. This means you need to know your timetable. All right. So we have here our first problem to be 5 times negative 3 times negative 4. Okay, that will be our first problem. I'll give it 3 examples within this part here, evaluating each expression. Our strategy here will be, since that there are no calculations within parentheses and no exponentials, we'll perform the multiplication working from left to right. Okay, so we proceed now. When we look at them, use the rule for multiplying two integers that have different signs. So we have 5 times negative 3. What do we end up with? Negative 15. Using the rules for multiplying two integers that have different signs. Now we ended up here with two integers that have the same sign, but not every time you will end up this way. But for right now, you end up with two integers that have, or two of them having the same sign. So now use the rule for multiplying two integers that have the same sign, and that gives us negative times a negative, it gives us a positive, which is then 60, and that's our solution. Okay, let's go to the next example. We have negative 6 times 5 times a negative 2. Okay, equals. Same concept again. Use the rules for multiplying two integers that have different signs. Start from left to right. So negative 6 times positive 5 gives us negative 30 times negative 2. Okay, and then use the rule for multiplying two integers that have the same sign again. That gives us positive 60. Not because I got positive 60 and positive 60 here means every time you will be getting positive 60. Just coincidence. So let's go with the next example now. We end up with negative 2 times negative 4 times a positive 3 times a positive say 5 and negative 5. So now again here use the rules for multiplying two integers that have the same sign. So in this case we're going to start from left to right, so we work with these two. Negative 2 times negative 4 will give us positive 8 times 3 times negative 5. Look at my steps, so make sure you write all of your steps when you're working with these types of problems here. So now use the rules for multiplying two integers that have the same sign. So end up here 8 times 3, that is 24, then times negative 5. Okay, now we're going to multiply now two integers that have different signs. This gives us negative 120, and that's our solution here likewise. So the properties of multiplication that were introduced before and here now, the multiplying whole numbers are also true for integers. Okay, so the properties for multiplication. So let me write the properties for multiplication of integers. This will be the commutative property, this is for multiplication. The order in which integers are multiplied does not change their product. Zoom in a little bit more there. The order in which integers are multiplied does not change their product. Okay, the associative property now. Okay, the way in which integers are grouped does not change their product. Multiplication property of 0, very important, which is here the product of any and every single integer, right? And 0 is 0. Multiplication property of 1. So the property of any integer and absolutely any integer and 1 is that same integer. Okay, so that should not be any problem for us to work with. Let's go to a few more examples in this topic. So we come here and we put now another example. Use the commutative and or you will decide associative properties of multiplication to evaluate each expression. Okay, so let's start. We're going to use that same one. So for us to stay consistent and to show that it works, we'll be using these same examples here. So you have 5 times -3 times -4. 5 times -3 times -4. Okay, so our result is supposed to be the same. Now what does this mean? To multiply the last two negatives factors to produce a positive factor, we can work with that. Alright, so when possible we will use the commutative and or the associative property of multiplication to multiply pairs of negative factors. Okay, so let's start with this one here. We keep the 5 and we say -3 times a -4, which means to multiply the last two negatives we produce a positive value, which gives us +12. 5 times +12 will give us 60. We're going to be that solution. So that's correct. So did we see that piece there that it works out to the same? Let's try the next problem now and see if we get up to the same answer. -6, 5, -2. -6, 5 is -2. Okay, multiply the negative factors to produce a positive factor. So that's the key part here. -6 times -2 will give me +12 times 5. 12 times 5 gives me 60. So that's correct. Okay, let's go to the next one. So notice 60 and 60 is the same solution as this one's here. So you have now -2, -3, -2, -3, -2, -4, 3, and -5. -2, -4, 3, -5. So we need to end up back with -120. Okay, multiply the first two negatives, these first two negatives here, factors to produce a positive product. Then multiply the last two factors. So we say now -2 times -4 gives me a +8, and 3 times -5 will gives me a 15. Okay, and so a positive times a negative will give me a negative, and 8 times 15 is going to give me 120. So our solution is negative 120, 60, and 60, and that's the solution we also got there. That is by using the commutative or associative property. Alright, let's try our next examples. Let's see now. Evaluate. I put examples. Negative 3, negative 5, and negative 6. Okay, and I'm going to put the next example right here so we can see what then happens. We have negative 4, negative 3, negative 5, and negative 8. Let's concentrate on the first one. So let's zoom into this one here. Here we are. So I'm going to put my equal sign here so I can write some more at the bottom. When possible, we will use a commutative and or associative property. That will be up to you to multiply pairs of negative factors, and it's up to you because you will realize it which one to use much better depending on the numbers that you can easily identify that you can work with. The product of two negative factors is positive. We know that for a fact. This approach will work with fewer negative numbers, and that lessens the possibility of error. So in other words, if you multiply two negatives, you get rid of negative signs and they become positive in multiplication, right? For right now. So multiply the first two negatives. We end up with negative 3 times negative 5. That gives me positive 15 times negative 6. Okay? Then we'll say the product is negative. Why? Because we'll multiply a positive times a negative. We end up there 30, 90. So we end up with negative 90. Okay? So let's go with the next one. So notice here what we multiply two negatives to end up with a positive, so we have less signs. Go to the next one. In this next one, note that this expression is a product of 4. They could have been 5, they could have been 6. Or in other words, an even number of values. All of them are negatives. Right? And we have an even number of numbers that will be multiplied, and all of them are negatives. Multiply the first two negative factors and the last two negative factors to produce positive products. So here again, negative 4 times negative 3 gives me positive 12. Alright, negative 5 times negative 8 gives me positive 40. Okay, so we end up with that piece. So now we actually have the product of two positive values. So 12 times 40 is going to give me 480. So you have 480 as a product there. So the product is positive, right? So the key part here is to try to get rid of the negative signs. All right. So let's write down a key observation here. And let me zoom back again. Here we have an odd number of negatives being multiplied. Here we have an even number of negatives. The product was positive. An odd number of values being multiplied, we end up with a negative still it. Okay? So let me write observations from this. Multiplying an even and an odd number of negative integers. This is what we're going to do. 1. The product of an even number of negative integers is positive, and the keyword here is even number. The product of an odd number of negative integers is negative. That's the key thing. So remember, if you're multiplying, capture that on there. So if you're multiplying an even number of negative integers, the product will be positive. If you're multiplying an odd number of negative integers, the product will be negative. That's what we saw here. That's what we end up here also. So we have the same observation based on this.